The car windows were fogged from the inside. 3 small shapes curled in the back seat. A woman slept upright in the front, her head against the cold glass. It was 11 p.m. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a scattering of cars under buzzing streetlights. He'd only stopped for coffee, but something about that fogged-up window made him park his car and just sit there, watching. He almost drove away. Twice. But here's what nobody in that parking lot expected. The man stepping out of that car was worth more than the entire town's annual budget, and he was about to do something none of his assistants would ever recommend. He was about to knock on a stranger's car window at almost midnight. Stay with this one, because what happens over the next hour doesn't just change one night for this family. It changes the rest of their lives. Maria Castillo was 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago, her car had become her home. She worked 2 jobs. Mornings at a laundromat, evenings cleaning offices downtown, and still hadn't weighed enough to cover the rent increase. Her landlord sprang on her with 30 days' notice. Her ex-husband had stopped sending support payments 8 months earlier, and the court system's idea of urgent moved slower than Maria's bank account could survive. She'd filed the paperwork 3 times. Each time, a new hearing date landed weeks further out than the last. She had 3 kids, Sophia 9, old enough to understand exactly what was happening and pretend she didn't. Eli, 6, who still asked when they were going back to the real house, and baby Noah, just 14 months old, who only knew that his mother's arms were warm, and that was enough for now. For 3 weeks, the car had been everything. A bedroom, a dining room, a bathroom, when gas station restrooms were closed. Maria parked at the McDonald's, Salat most nights, because the lighting felt safer than the alternatives, and the manager who closed at 10 p.m. had quietly stopped asking her to move along, pretending not to notice the family settling in for the night in the corner of the lot. He'd started leaving the bathroom unlocked a few extra minutes past closing, never saying why, never making it a conversation. She told herself this was temporary. She told the kids it was an adventure. She told no one at either of her jobs, because she'd rate us, seen what happened to coworkers who admitted they were struggling. Pity at first, then distance, then nothing. Better to show up early, smile at the right moments, and let nobody guess that home was wherever she'd parked the night before. What she didn't know was that tonight, parked 4 spaces away, a man named Richard Calloway had pulled in for coffee on his way home from a board meeting that ran 4 hours longer than it should have. The kind of meeting that left him drained in a way no amount of success ever seemed to fix. Richard owned a logistics company worth 9 figures, the kind of business empire built on decisions made in boardrooms, not parking lots. He'd driven past 1,000 cars with their windows fogged up. He'd never stopped for one. His driver usually handled nights like this, but tonight he'd sent the car home early and driven himself, craving 20 minutes where nobody needed anything from him. But tonight, something about the way the smallest shape in that back seat had a blanket pulled all the way over a tiny head made him put his coffee down before he'd even taken a sip. An instinct he couldn't fully explain even to himself in the moment. And then, he made a decision that would have made his board of directors very uncomfortable. He got out of his car. Richard approached the car slowly, hands visible, the way you'd approach something you didn't want to startle. The pavement was cold even through his shoes, and for a moment he almost talked himself out of it, almost turned back toward his own car, and the easy, uncomplicated drive home that was waiting for him. He knocked gently on the window. 3 soft taps. Maria's eyes snapped open immediately, every instinct in her body already calculating distance to the doors, to her kids, to anything she could use to protect them. She rolled the window down 2 inches. No more. "I'm not trying to scare you," Richard said quickly. "I just wanted to check if you and your kids were okay." "We're fine," Maria said, the words coming out sharper than she meant them to. Years of practice keeping strangers at exactly this distance. "We're just resting before a long drive." It was the same line she'd used twice before, to 2 different men who'd knocked on different nights, and both times it had worked well enough to make them walk away. Richard glanced past her shoulder at the 3 sleeping shapes in the back seat, and something in his face told her He didn't believe the long drive story for a second. I run a company a few miles from here, Richard said carefully, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket, his hand steady despite how unusual this entire moment felt even to him. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me buy your kids breakfast tomorrow morning. Right here. Public place. You pick the time. Maria's jaw tightened. I've had people offer to help before. It always comes with a price I can't afford. She thought of the landlord who'd offered to work something out, with a smile she didn't trust, and the way she'd packed the car that same night, instead of finding out what he meant. There's no price, Richard said. I have 3 kids of my own. They're grown now. But I remember nights I came close to losing everything, and somebody helped me without making me feel small for needing it. I'm not him. I'm trying to be that somebody. Badly. At 11 at night, in a parking lot. I know how this looks. He glanced down at himself, at the tailored coat that probably cost more than Maria's car, and almost laughed at how absurd the whole scene must look from the outside. Maria studied his face for a long moment, looking for the catch, the angle, the thing men always wanted in return. She didn't find one. That almost scared her more. Why does it matter to you? She finally asked. You don't know us. Richard was quiet for a moment, the parking lot lights buzzing faintly overhead, his breath visible in the cold night air. Because 20 years ago, he said, my wife and I slept in a car for 6 weeks with our first daughter. Nobody stopped to check on us. Not once. I promised myself, if I was ever in a position to be the person who stops, I would. I haven't kept that promise in a long time. I got busy. I got comfortable. Tonight I almost drove past you too. He said the last part quietly, almost like a confession, the kind of admission that cost him more than the offer he'd just made. Maria's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough. My daughter Sophia asked me yesterday if we're poor now, Maria said, her voice barely holding together. I told her we're just between houses. She's 9. She knows I'm lying. She wiped at her eyes quickly with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be crying in front of a stranger she'd known for less than 5 minutes. You don't have to lie to me, Richard said quietly. Let me help. Not charity. A start. A real one. A job lead. A deposit on an apartment. Whatever gets you and these kids out of this car by next week. In the back seat, Sophia's voice, small and groggy, cut through the dark. Mom? Who's that? She'd propped herself up on one elbow, blinking against the dim light, clearly having heard more of the conversation than either adult realized. Maria looked at her daughter, then back at Richard, then at the business card still extended through the 2-inch gap in her window. You could feel, in that parking lot, 3 weeks of exhaustion and fear meeting one stranger's quiet refusal to just drive away, and a mother finally, carefully, deciding whether 3 weeks of no had room left for one, maybe. Maria didn't take the card that night. She wrote down a number instead, on the corner of a fast food napkin, and told Richard she'd think about it. She watched his taillights disappear out of the lot before she let herself look at the napkin. Again, half expecting the offer to feel different in the daylight. She called 2 days later, after the napkin had survived a wash cycle in her jacket pocket, and somehow remained legible. Richard picked up on the second ring, like he'd been hoping she would. What followed wasn't a single grand gesture. It was smaller, steadier things. A job interview at one of his company's regional offices. An actual interview based on her experience, not a favor disguised as one. A security deposit covered as a loan, not a gift, because Maria had insisted she wanted to pay it back, and Richard respected that enough not to argue. He checked in twice that first week. Brief texts asking nothing more than whether the kids were settling in okay. 3 weeks after that parking lot conversation, Maria signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment, 11 minutes from Sophia's school. The paperwork feeling almost unreal in her hands, after 3 weeks of paperwork that only ever seemed to take things away from her. When she unlocked the door for the first time, Eli ran straight to the empty living room and just stood there, turning in a slow circle, his sneakers squeaking against the bare floor, arms outstretched like he was measuring how much space they were finally allowed to take up. Is this ours? He asked. For real? For real? For real, Maria said. And for the first time in 3 months, she didn't have to lie about anything that came after that sentence. Sophia, standing in the doorway of what would become her own room, didn't say anything right away. She just walked to the window, looked out at an ordinary street with ordinary houses, and started to cry. The kind of crying that comes from relief, not sadness. Maria stood behind her, not saying anything either, letting her daughter have the moment without trying to fix it or explain it. Here's the meaning moment, the part that makes this more than a feel-good parking lot story. Richard didn't fix Maria's life. He didn't hand her a fortune or erase 3 months of fear with one conversation. He did something smaller and harder. He stopped, when stopping cost him nothing but convenience. And he kept showing up after that first knock on the window, when it would have been easier to feel good about one good deed and move on. The follow-through mattered more than the gesture ever could have on its own. That image, 3 kids at a table, a mother finally sitting down instead of watching the doors, is the freeze frame the whole story builds toward. Not a rescue, a start. The difference between someone driving past a fogged-up window and someone choosing, just once, to knock. Noah banged his spoon happily against his high-chair tray, and for once, the sound didn't make Maria flinch and check the parking lot outside. After everything Maria and her kids went through, 3 weeks in a car, a stranger's knock on a window, a napkin with a phone number that changed everything, one thing becomes impossible to forget. Most people who need help don't look like they're asking for it. So tell me, have you ever had a stranger show up for you exactly when you needed it most, with no explanation for why? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and these stories matter more than you'd think, because they remind all of us what's still possible between strangers. If this story moved you even a little, hit subscribe, not for us, but for every family quietly getting through a hard season in a parking lot somewhere tonight. And if tonight's story stayed with you, wait until you see what happens when a retired teacher recognizes a former student's voice on a late-night radio call-in show. Until then, take care of each other.